Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hi, Liberation Nation. This week I am coming to you with a new friend of mine, Harry Szabo. And Harry is a writer and union organizer. Their books, What Big Teeth and We All Fall Down, explore bad queer representation. They live with their 3 cats in Richmond, Virginia, and the book that Harry chose was From the Dust Return by Ray Bradbury and explores, kind of classic Gothic writing. And it was interesting to hear Harry, not only is this book such a formative book for them, but then also impacted their writing and just the kind of subconscious journey that Harry went on with this book. So I hope you enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed talking about it, and here we go. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to jump real quick because I wanted to talk about the wine before we launch into the book. Your book. Do you want to tell us the name of the book? Maybe that should go first.
Sure. It's From the Dust Returned by Ray Bradbury.
Mm-hmm. And this story, would you call it Gothic? Is that you tell me. What would you title this? What would you term it as?
Yeah, I think it's Midwestern Gothic, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And Ray Bradbury is so interesting because he also writes so much sci-fi, and the sci-fi also has like a Gothic vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But he sort of writes in 2 arenas. It's like either you're in Mars or you're in the Midwest.
Okay. There's no in between.
Oh, I guess that's not true. I guess he also writes like dystopian scenarios that are like, what if Mars was the Midwest?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This is my first Ray Bradbury book, so thank you for introducing it to me. I guess pushing me out, I don't want to say my comfort zone, but like what I normally read.
What do you usually read?
I always joke, like, I read The Bell Jar at 21, and I've been chasing that high ever since.
Oh, wow.
Of, like, sad girl lit. And I mean, like, some romance, too, and, like, thrillers and things like that. But just, just anything that's very, like, emotionally driven or family driven or those kinds of stories really pull me in a lot, so.
Yeah. I do love a character-driven novel.
Yeah. A relationship drama. Ugh. Gets me every time. So anyway, but when I was reading this story, and there is a tie-in to that, like the Addams Family, it felt like to me, like I picked up a lot of that when I was reading it. And then also, like, the cover is done by Charles Addams, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who started in the New Yorker with those like little single panel cartoons.
Yeah. And so when I was picking out the drink, first of all, I was like, we could do like a cocktail that maybe like directly tied into one of the characters, but I was just
like a corpse reviver.
Right, exactly. But I was like, I don't know. I want to do something like really classic and like what is just goes with like a Gothic kind of story. And so we're just doing a red wine. And then the one I got is called The Fugitive, and I liked it going back to the Addams Family because it had, I think they had like a cousin or someone that was invisible. So on the bottle it had like an invisible looking man that was very reminiscent. And I also liked this quote that was on the label. It's not just any wine, it's the wine you drink when you know it may be your last.
Dun, dun, dun.
So anyway, so we tied that in. But that's the wine that we went with for this. So going to From the Dust Returned. Who are you when you first picked up this book?
Oh, interesting. So there's this chapter in the middle, I think, called The April Witch, that I actually read long before I read From the Dust Returned as a standalone short story in like a magazine for children.
Okay.
Which is interesting because it doesn't really read to me now as a children's story, but at the time I really fell right into it. That character is named Ceci, and she spends all day in her room dreaming, and in her dreams she enters the minds and bodies of other creatures. And the story The April Witch is about her dreaming her way into like a car where a girl is like making out with her boyfriend on a date. And Ceci has basically never left her house. She spends like years at a time sleeping, only really wakes up for family reunions, but she can go anywhere in her mind. And when I was a kid, that's often how I felt. I lived in a pretty isolated farmhouse. I, lived in a family where I think a lot of people struggled with socializing. I sort of conceptualized my family as the Addams family, and I really related to Ceci. So insular and also so curious about the outside world.
Okay. So, and I didn't catch how old were you when you read it? Do you remember?
I do not remember.
Okay.
I actually forgot about From the Dust Returned probably ages like 15 to 25 or so. Okay. And then I was in my grad school program writing What Big Teeth.
Okay.
And a classmate of mine was, who was just lovely guy, joked around with me a lot. He was like, "You realize you're just ripping off From the Dust Returned, right?"
Oh, okay.
And I said, "Pardon?" And he produced the book, and it was like, "Oh, I remember everything."
Okay, it all came back.
Yeah. But I'd forgotten about it entirely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stuck with you, though.
It really did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is, like, so do you want to kind of give us, like, a premise of what the book is about?
Yeah. So it's about this sort of big, creaky house in the rural Midwest. There's a little town. All the people in the town are afraid of the house. And it's family reunion season, which happens every autumn. Mm-hmm. And all of these different creatures, like ghosts and bat people and zombies and things like that, descend upon the house to visit. And this is the first time that it's ever happened in the lifetime of Timothy, who is the protagonist, who's this foundling child, who's totally unspooky. He's not magical in any way. And so much of the story is just his awe and desire to be like the rest of his family.
And they, if I recall, they look down on him because he's human, right? And that's like, considered a weakness. Yeah,
they do and they don't. I feel like some of them want to eat him, some of them tease him about it, some of them are like, there, I was human once too. Someday you'll be dead and it'll be fine. Yeah, like he isn't afraid of them. In fact, like he wishes that he were more like them.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's also the fact that he is mortal, I guess. Does that tie in to the fact that, some of the things that he wants to be with that he wants to be like them, that he is going to die and they won't?
Yeah, there's this like sort of poignancy to the book, which is that he has something that some of them either will never have or will never have again, which is that he gets to be alive and human and mortal. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the book is actually about like what is mortality and what is immortality. And I think by the end it almost sort of like reverses in terms of like what you consider to be the more living experience. Mm-hmm. Like there are these the sort of like elders of the family are these mummies from Egypt who live in the attic. And their existence is like entirely relegated to the attic. They can't move. People have to come and like bring them wine in cups.
Well, perfect for us to drink our wine.
It is. The opening of the book is actually little Timothy bringing a cup of wine to his ancient ancestor.
Yeah.
Who's the mummy in the attic.
And a grandmère.
Mm-hmm. I ripped that off too.
And
my publisher will be deeply disappointed that I'm admitting this.
Well, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I guess I'll introduce it. That you're a writer, and this story has influenced your writing, and your book, which I just read and I love. I highly recommend to our listeners, What Big Teeth. It's kind of a young adult story, but do you want to tell us how it kind of connects to this and your inspiration around it?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, I had no idea that I was being inspired by it when I started
Right.
working on it again. I'd always sort of been obsessed with the Addams family and with the idea that there are these sort of like isolated pockets of strangeness in the world that are like almost concentrated in families. And so I set out to write what I thought was my own sort of take on the Addams family, but it was also in a lot of ways my own take on From the Dust Returned, which is about a family of werewolves who live in small town Maine, in a big house on the hill overlooking a little fishing village. And one of the children in that family, Eleanor, thinks that she's been exiled from the family because there's nothing magical about her, because she's weak and pathetic compared to everybody else. And she comes home after an incident at boarding school where she bites another girl, thinking, like, this is the only place I can run to, but I don't think I can trust these people either. But they certainly won't turn me into the law. And when she comes home, one of the things that strikes her is that her grandmother actually seems afraid of her. And a lot of the book is the mystery of why, when she thinks of herself as so weak and vulnerable, why is her grandmother, who is this like witch ruling over a family of werewolves, so terrified of her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I found there's like a lot of truth to that story, particularly what you just said, where sometimes we think of ourselves as the victim. And you don't realize, like, for good or for, I mean, for good or for bad, you know, your own internal power. I mean, I sometimes remember instances in my life where I thought I thought I was the victim, and really I was almost like the bad, like the mean girl. Did you watch, what is it, 30 Rock?
Yes, I was just thinking of that scene where Liz Lemon has the revised, revisionist history.
Yeah, yeah.
That she was being bullied, and actually she was bullying everybody around her without even realizing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think not to that same extent. I don't want anyone. I mean, I don't think I was horribly mean to anyone, but it was sort of like a growing up thing where I realized, like, oh, I had way more power in that situation than I realized, and sort of like realizing to step into your power a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I spend a lot of time now thinking about people and power, because I do organizing. And one of the things that's a really hard sell for people is you have more power than you think you do. Mm-hmm. And you can either notice that and use it deliberately, or you're probably going to use it by accident.
Okay.
And I don't want to say for good or for evil or anything like that, but I think that aware and unaware often maps onto, are you using it in the ways that you want to be, or are you using it in ways that you don't want to be actually?
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Well, good. So also, I'm kind of curious, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience, like becoming a writer and what that, because that's really interesting and special.
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved writing. And, you know, one of the things that I also do is teach. And I feel like so many people have this experience at some point where they get dissuaded from writing by being told that there are right and wrong answers. Mm-hmm. And I feel very grateful to my own sort of idiosyncratic Addams family for really not ever saying anything like that to me. You know, I'd write weird little short stories or like threatening notes to my preschool teacher, and they were just like, "You're such a good writer. Keep writing."
What kind of threatening notes do you have? Funny ones?
I tried to organize a coup in preschool.
Oh, no.
But, where I was trying to convince people that we should overthrow the preschool teacher and then we could run the preschool.
Oh.
They did have a talk with me about the fact that I had hurt her feelings, but they didn't critique the writing.
Okay. Wow. So you knew very young that you were going to be organizing and writing.
I guess. But But yeah, my family was very supportive of my writing, and I can remember very early on, like my mom taking dictation and me just saying, inane kid stuff. Like, write a story about a princess who's asleep with a pillow and blanket is one of the things that I remember. And she dutifully wrote down princess, asleep, pillow, blanket. And yeah, so it was always something that was very comfortable for me and that I did almost without thinking about it, and then just continued to do for fun, and no one stopped me. And eventually I found out it was a thing that you could go to grad school for, and that they would pay you a teeny tiny sum of money that you could technically live on. And so I did that twice, and it just sort of kept happening. And then I realized I would need to get serious if I wanted to actually make any money to live on and not have to get another job.
Right.
So I made like a little spreadsheet of agents and started sending stuff around to agents.
Okay.
This sounds so like, oh, of course, but it's weird. It was like something that was just always happening in the background of my life until suddenly it wasn't.
Right.
Like whatever else I was doing, I was also writing weird stories.
How often do you write every day?
Oh my God, no. I go through seasons in my life where I write very little or not much at all. And then other times where I try to be really disciplined and put a draft together in a pretty short amount of time. I think I work best when I have like 3 or 4 months and I'm working on a draft and I stay current with it. And if I go too long without working on a draft, I come back and everything either looks like totally brilliant and I'm never going to write that well again, or it looks incoherent and I can't remember where I was going with any of this. So I tend to go in seasons. And this has probably been like the longest season in my life so far of not really setting aside time to write because I've been working on some other projects. But one of my goals for this summer is to sit down and just write one full draft of anything. And I don't even know what it's going to look like now because it's been a while.
Yeah. Do you write like when you're writing a story, you said you write the draft. I mean, is it beginning to end? Do you write scenes?
I really try to write beginning to end because I've found that if I plot or outline, or if I start with just my favorite scenes, what ends up happening is that I lose interest because I don't know, there's no mystery for me in it. In like second and third drafts, obviously, like I've sort of spoiled the mystery and I have to find like new mysteries to dig into. But the way that I write best is beginning to end because I want to know what's going to happen next.
Right.
Almost like those Charles Dickens serials where he's just like, and I've left off on a cliffhanger at the end of this chapter and I've got to resolve it today.
Going back to From the Dust Returns, some of the characters in that. I mean, did any of them stand out to you, or do you have some favorites?
Well, there's this one who lives her life in reverse. She's sort of like, almost like Benjamin Buttons.
That's what I was going to say.
What does she do? She like, it's been a little while since I've read that. I skimmed this a little bit to refresh myself for today. But she almost like is in like this glass coffin or something, and then emerges as this like beautiful young woman, and then ages in reverse all the way down to like an infant, and then I think just sort of winks out of existence. But like my sense is that this happens to her on like a cycle or something, like that this is how she lives, like almost like a cicada.
Yeah.
Like that she hatches, has this grand experience, and then just like withers into nothing. Yeah, there's this sort of, it says it's a novel, but it's almost like short stories, and there's like a sort of surreal quality to all of these different non-human life stories. Like living for 3,000 years, but you're tucked away in an attic, or living only from the summer to the fall and in reverse, or sleeping all of the time, but you can be anyone you want to be while you're dreaming.
Yeah.
And I can't tell if the book thinks that this is better than being human, or if all of these things are sadder than being human, or if all of these things are just different ways of being human. I'm not sure he's resolved it.
And he wrote this book over a long period of time, right?
Yeah, my sense is that it was a bunch of sort of stories that eventually coalesced into one narrative.
Yeah.
And weirdly, that's actually kind of similar to how I wrote What Big Teeth, although I didn't I wasn't thinking about him at the time when I started writing it. I like drew some little cartoon when I was like 20 that was like a sort of Addams Family, because I found a picture frame in my basement as a child, and it was like empty. It was one of those picture frames that's supposed to have like all the different little family photos, like it's got
Right.
20 little holes in it,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all empty. And I was like, this is so typical. My family is so bad at documentation. And so I drew all these little pictures to put in the frames, kind of in exasperation, but then I got into it. And then I was like, I should write a story about these people. And then I put the project down for years.
Okay.
And then I picked it up and tried to write some short stories and then put it down for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, maybe it's going to be a card game. And then that didn't go anywhere.
Okay.
And then one day I got really, really mad about how long it had been that I had this vision of this sort of feral, animalistic, immortal family.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in my, I guess, mid-20s, living in the laundry room of a tiny apartment. And I decided to just sit down and write one coherent draft, no matter how long it took. And I wrote something like 50,000 words in 24 hours, and I just kept making cups of coffee and bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches.
Uh-huh.
And then it was like 5 a.m., and I took a cat nap, and then got up and wrote some more, and then I had a draft. And I thought, okay, well, at least I did that.
Wow. I've never heard of anyone doing that before.
I had heard of someone doing it during National Novel Writing Month.
Okay.
There was someone on the forums when I was growing up who was like famous for being able to write a draft in 24 hours.
Wow.
And I really admired and looked up to her. I could never write a draft in 24 hours until that one time, and then never again.
Never say never.
That's true. Maybe that's what I'll do this summer. Although I don't think at this stage in my life, even that amount of coffee could keep me awake for 24 hours straight.
Yeah. That's a young person's game, you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm talking like teenagers.
That's somebody with like no lower back problems activity. I can't sit in a chair for 24 hours now.
No, absolutely not. You got to get up and move around. But that's very cool. And going and talking about, we already mentioned the Grand Mare character that's in from The Dust Returns, but you also have a Grand Mare in What Big Teeth. Do you were they inspired by each other?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
This sort of immortal ancestor who is older than time and yet also interacts with the family was definitely, an inspiration. And then I feel a little bad saying this because she has done so much healing and growing and learning ever since that time, but the Grand Mare in my book is largely inspired by my mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's somebody who really had like a strong vision for what she wanted her reality to be like and was very, very good at creating her reality in our family and sort of in the world around her.
Okay. The Grand Mare character in your novel
Yes.
is very one of her strengths is that when she says something, people listen. And would you say that applies to your mom too?
Absolutely. And I think that she's found a lot of constructive outlets for that now. She mentors people. She runs businesses. She, engages politically. And I think when her sphere was sort of more limited to the immediate family, it was a lot.
She's someone that needs to have a lot, like a wide range of influence.
Yes. My therapist said about me, some people just really like a lot of stimulation in their lives.
Okay.
And I was like, oh. And I think me and my mother have that in common. We're both people who really don't mind a lot of intensity and don't mind having like a wide scope of influence and like to get things done. And that as soon as you make that box too small, we start acting nuts. So it's really back to that question of power. It's like, how do you understand your power and how do you find the appropriate outlets for your power?
Yeah.
My partner said to me a little while ago, it sometimes feels like you have two votes. Like, everybody else has one vote and you have two votes.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, if you know that about yourself and you know that you're the kind of person who moves through the world like you have two votes, I don't know, maybe maybe join your local DNC.
Yeah.
You know? Use your second vote for something other than the people you love.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't really thought about that a whole lot, but I've definitely been in situations where I've influenced things way more than I realized. I was like, that very easily went my way.
Oh, like what?
I'm thinking a very specific incident where I was on this voting committee and I was just like, here's my opinion on it. And everyone was like, okay, well, we'll go that. We'll just do it. And I was, no one else has an opinion. And so, yeah, I might have two votes as well. I don't know. I have to think about it. Maybe I need to talk with my therapist a little bit.
I think, that can be a really exciting and positive thing for people as long as they understand their own power and know that they can say no to you. How do you construct your power so that other people can learn how to feel powerful too?
Yeah. And to set up boundaries and everything and to make sure they feel comfortable, and not that I'm just going to ride the train and be the conductor the whole way. So anyway, going back a little bit to From the Dust Returned, I'm curious, what would you say is kind of the vibe of this story? Would you say it's funny? Would you say, I said it was gothic, but it's also very sweet and poignant too. How would you define it?
I think that the thing that stuck with me is that it's ornate and maximalist.
Define maximalist to the layman, including myself.
Sure. I guess I just mean that the way it's written is extremely extra.
Okay. Yes.
Could I read an excerpt?
Yeah,
from the
I would
beginning?
love that.
Okay. Okay, so this is from the prologue. The beautiful one is here. In the attic where the rain touched the roof softly on spring days, and where you could feel the mantle of snow outside, a few inches away on December nights, 1,000 times great-grandmère existed. She did not live, nor was she eternally dead. She existed. And now, with the great event about to happen, the great night arriving, the homecoming about to explode, she must be visited. Ready? Here I come, Timothy's voice cried faintly beneath a trapdoor that trembled. Yes? Silence. The Egyptian mummy did not twitch. She stood propped in a dark corner like an ancient dried plum tree or an abandoned and scorched ironing board, her hands and wrists trussed across her dry riverbed bosom, a captive of time, her eyes slits of deep blue lapis lazuli between thread-sewn lids, a glitter of remembrance as her mouth, with a shriveled tongue wormed in it, whistled and sighed and whispered to recall every hour of every lost night 4,000 years back, when she was a pharaoh's daughter dressed in spider linens and warm-breathed silks, with jewels burning her wrists, as she ran in the marble gardens to watch the pyramids erupt in the fiery Egyptian air.
Wow. And that's just the beginning.
Yeah. Jewels burning her wrists is such a line. Or the pyramids erupt.
Yeah.
Ray Bradbury knows how to just put a verb down on the table. And be like, we're using our strong verbs today.
Yeah. So that's what you mean by maximalist.
Everything is described. There's no, characters aren't just walking and putting their hands on a table and saying things. Everything is, it's interesting because this is a moment of such total stillness. She's a mummy in an attic by herself. And yet there's so much action taking place in her stillness, because of all of those big active verbs and all of those sort of glittering descriptions.
Have you read a lot of other stuff by Ray Bradbury?
I've mostly really read his more gothic Midwestern stuff, Something Wicked This Way Comes. He wrote a children's book called The Halloween Tree, which is a bunch of little short stories about Halloween. For some reason, sci-fi is always very difficult for me to read. And I haven't read Fahrenheit 451. I don't know
Yeah.
how I've somehow missed out on that in my life, but it just hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read it yet either. I hope to get to it at some point.
Yeah, I think in ninth grade you could either read that or some other thing, and I think I picked whatever the other thing
In
was.
1984, maybe. They similar kind of vibes.
I read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in high school, and that was like so weird and formative. I just walked around in a daze being like, we're all trapped in a psychiatric ward. God, I was an absolutely insufferable high school student. I feel very grateful to all the teachers who got me through that.
Yeah, what were you like as a high school student?
Total anarchist.
Okay. Can I tell the reader you have like a leather coat? Not the reader, the listener, but yeah, you have the leather coat.
Yeah, shaved head, Richmond for All t-shirt with a skeleton on it.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you haven't veered too far away from a little anarchy, maybe.
I feel like now I really understand that you can't do anything without other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I was young, I just wanted to be the star of the show all the time.
Okay.
I think that's probably the main thing that's changed, is that I have an appreciation for the fact that nobody can just handle everything themselves, including, burning down their high school.
Right.
Yes.
Well, glad you did. Are you from this area? Are you from like the Richmond area?
I'm from Northern Virginia.
Okay.
So I had a lot to rebel against.
Yeah.
I feel like I came to Richmond when I was for college, and I suddenly felt so normal in a bad way.
Okay.
I had been, the really far left, really sort of bad kid vibes at my fairly prissy high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to Richmond, and there were people who didn't believe in gender. And I was like, wait, you can just not have that? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Or, I said casually to somebody, like, that's real Christian of you, meaning like that's real nice. And they were like, I am not a Christian.
Okay.
And that is not the only way to be good. And I was kind of thrown.
Yeah. We love Richmond. We've been here. I've been here for 13 years. So, and Bill was getting his master's when I moved, and we got married when I moved here. Whole long story. But I always thought we'd move back down, and I'm like, well, they've always got all these like fun festivals here. like, why leave? So coming back to the book, I guess a little bit. We've read a little. You read a little bit of Ray Bradbury, not a lot of the sci-fi. Do you know a lot about him otherwise, or I mean, he's pretty prolific, I guess. So.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about him as an author. Mm-hmm. Something that stuck with me for years is that he told this story in some other book that I read, maybe about writing, about going to a traveling carnival when he was a kid. And that really inspired Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was also a very formative book for me. Mm-hmm. But he went to this carnival, and there was a man called like Mr. Electrico or something. And he would get electrocuted in an electric chair every night and do magic tricks with the electricity. Oh my gosh. One of which was he had a sword, and he would, be electrocuted in the chair and then lift the sword, and the sword would crackle with lightning. And Ray Bradbury says that Mr. Electrico pointed the sword at him and said, you will live forever. And that's
amazing.
I think altered the course of his life.
Yeah. I mean, I would change my life. Well, yeah, I know he wrote this book over a long period of time, and he was writing it with Charles Addams. And
Oh, it's so fascinating I did not know that, which is hilarious because I love Charles Addams. I'm obsessed with the Addams Family. Yeah. I did not put together until you pointed out the cover that they had any connection to each other.
That was, when I'm coming into this, I want to find out what I can about the story as much. So that was something that I found online of the story of that they originally started this together, and like they would, like some of the short stories initially, I guess Homecoming chapter, that was originally published in Mademoiselle magazine.
Oh.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
He was talking about that he kept trying to submit Homecoming to this magazine called Weird Tales, and they kept rejecting it because they wanted it to be like Edgar Allan Poe, and this is not really that. And then he was like, somehow Mademoiselle magazine decided they were going to do their October issue around it. So
I only read Mademoiselle for the articles.
yeah, same. But anyway, but then I guess Adams did the cover, and they were going to do a lot of it together. But
were they friends? Like,
yes.
Oh.
Yes, they were friends, and he said actually that when Charles Adams died, I guess his partner or his agent or someone sent to Ray Bradbury a letter talking about how it would have felt incomplete if he had written this story of the Elliot family without him. And yeah, they were friends, but then the way it made it sound is they basically kind of went on different paths, and then he got so famous and so busy with the Addams family. Also, he writes in here, Ray Bradbury gets interested because somehow he got signed on to write the movie version of Moby Dick.
Okay.
Okay, do you have a Moby Dick?
Okay.
All right, Harry is showing me their Moby, the whale.
Yes.
On your arm. So you are a fan.
I am. And I am fascinated. It is a gift to learn that Ray Bradbury and Charles Adams were friends. So thank you for telling me that.
Okay, yeah, good.
And I'm also sort of fascinated by the connection to Moby Dick, which is also, I think, in a lot of ways, gothic and episodic, and also features a chapter that's crazy about lightning. So are you familiar with the general plot arc of Moby Dick? Because it's long, and I think it's famous for being boring, mostly.
Yeah, I am familiar with Call Me Ishmael, Ahab. Interesting we're tying this in. I have another episode that I just recorded recently of the book Ahab's Wife.
Oh,
which
I have not read that.
Yes, it's very good, but it's basically like there's a small part of Moby Dick where it mentions that Ahab has a wife, and then never again. But this whole book is saying, like, well, who was that person? And sort of like the feminized, the opposite version of Ahab, who's out there, like, trying to get the whale. I don't want to hear it. You tell the story of Ahab and Moby Dick.
Sure. So this is a fascinating book. I actually wrote my, senior thesis on this in undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
I got really fascinated by it because there's a professor at VCU, still there, really love him. He was actually one of the first people when I came to VCU who said, we're all in agreement that gender is a construct, right? In class, like, just casually. And everyone just sort of around me nodded, so I also nodded. And then, now I'm trans.
Uh-huh.
So thanks, Les Harrison.
Yes, thank you.
Anyway, so I was reading Moby Dick for his class, and I had this sort of profound experience in one of the early chapters of realizing that this book, that is sort of famous for being boring, is gay, multiracial, and kind of about America. Like, one of the very first things that happens is this Ishmael, suicidal twink, goes, he's, like, really feeling bad about his life, so he quits teaching school and decides he's going to go to sea. He goes to a small town in Nantucket to try and get recruited to go on a boat. The first night that he's there, he can't afford a hotel room for just himself. The only room that's left has just one bed. So just one bed trope. Yes.
Yeah, classic romance trope.
Yes.
You're not a romance reader.
And what the bartender does not tell him is that his roommate is going to be a hot 6'3" Polynesian man.
Okay.
Heavily tattooed.
Uh-huh.
And this guy just climbs into bed with him after he's gone to bed.
Uh-huh.
And the next morning they wake up and they start talking and become friends. And then the guy is like, we're basically married. And then they cuddle a lot, and then they decide to go to sea together.
Okay.
Yes. there's nothing that is clearly a sex scene, but there's definitely a ton of cuddling.
Read between the lines.
Yes. Yes, there's a lot of like, and then sometimes he would throw one leg over mine, so free and easy with each other we were. And then they go to sea, and basically like his boyfriend is very good at throwing harpoons, but he's actually really bad at stuff. So basically he's a spousal hire.
Okay.
And they get recruited to go on this boat with this guy who's insane with bloodlust for the whale that took his leg. And who's making kind of a lot of bad managerial decisions as a result. And everybody is getting increasingly uneasy with the quality of the managerial decisions.
Right.
And it gets to the point where there's this lightning storm, and St. Elmo's fire, the green lightning is like rippling down the ship. And rather than going below deck like a sensible person, Ahab demands that everybody come and stand on the deck and watch the lightning. And I think even like lifts a harpoon to the heavens, and it gets like struck by the lightning, and he screams out something like, "I see thee, clear spirit, and I know thy right worship is defiance." Just a man having a meltdown and making all of his employees watch him have a meltdown. But I don't know, like I'm sort of fascinated and wondering like what the connection is between these works now, between like Charles Addams and Ray Bradbury and like a century before Herman Melville.
Yeah.
Like, what was it about?
I have to look it up. Hang on. It's at the very...
It's in the afterword?
He has like little afterwords. Yes. My plans for a possible book were delayed to my good fortune in landing the job of writing the screenplay for John Huston's Moby Dick. But then he says, but over the years I kept revisiting my beloved Eliots. And so it goes back to him and Charles Addams, and it was really fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. It kind of all comes together. And like I said, I very much, when I was reading this, I was like, gosh, this is like Addams Family. So I do want to ask you, is there anything we haven't really kind of covered about the book that you were hoping to talk about?
I feel like something that really stands out to me is that it's an ensemble cast.
Mm-hmm.
And I love stories with an ensemble cast. Somehow they feel more... Obviously, this is not a realistic work of fiction, but there's something about the ensemble cast that feels to me like a kind of realism that you don't see a lot in fiction, where I think often fiction has one or two real characters who are interacting with each other, or maybe three, and they're in a dynamic of some kind. And then everybody else just sort of exists to like walk on stage and like influence one of those characters' choices in a way that like causes them to move off of each other in some way. And I love when a story manages to have 8 or 10 characters who, even if you don't see every single thing that they do, all feel fully realized. Mm-hmm. Like that when they're beyond the edges of the frame of the story, they're doing something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very cool. I appreciate you pointing that out, because I don't know if I would have made all those very bright and writerly connections.
I just feel like a boundless enthusiasm for good storytelling. I don't know that it's like bright so much as that I'm always like trying to like pull it apart and figure out what they're doing in there.
Yeah. Who would you, I mean, if you were going to recommend from The Dust Returns, like who was this kind of book for, you think?
I think you have to be at least a little bit patient. You have to be like comfortable with ambiguity and the idea that this is meant to be evocative and not necessarily meant to take you to a particular destination.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you like sitting and staring out of a window in a bathrobe, you'll probably like this book.
Very specific.
I think if you like other Gothic fiction, like, I don't know, I think if you enjoyed Jane Eyre, you'll probably enjoy this.
Okay.
And it's, like, much shorter and snappier than Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you love the Addams Family, you'll love this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Well, thanks so much. So do you want to tell listeners, like, I know you're going to be working on a project this summer. Where else can we find you? Any spotlights you would like to point?
Yeah, so I still haven't changed my name on my website. If you go to roseszabo.com, you can read a couple of free little stories and articles that I've written if that so moves you. I wrote a fun story about a guy who does not realize that he is spending Christmas with vampires, based sort of on P.G. Wodehouse's character of Bertie Wooster.
Mm-hmm.
Just total lovable idiot, wanders through life encountering situations. And if you are a higher ed employee in the state of Virginia, your union is United Campus Workers of Virginia, and you can join at ucwva.org. Always got to plug the union.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thanks a bunch. This was a really good hang, and cheers.
Cheers. This is delicious, by the way.
Yes.
My new favorite word for wine is jammy.
Okay.
This definitely is jammy.
It's very jammy. It's very red fruit forward, I would say. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the show notes, but it's the Fugitive red wine. And it wasn't like
Fugitive.
A Cabernet or a Zinfandel. They were just like, this is red wine. But anyway.
Love that.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.